Okay, we're going to start this very, very special council meeting. Before I begin, of course, a special shout out to our technical support in the form of Herb and Neil, and also to staff, many of whom supported the convening and the organization of this evening. I understand Parks and Rec was also here, clearing and cleaning the floor, the pavilion for tonight's meeting. So we are very grateful to be in South Gore Park. I also want to extend our deep appreciation to the Kemptville District Community Association for organizing and hosting a welcome reception. Thank you. Wendy, who's here with us this evening. Of course, we're here tonight because it is the 25th anniversary of North Grenville as an amalgamated municipality. And if your memories need to be refreshed, in 1998, the historic Oxford-on-Rideau Township, Town of Kemptville, and Township of South Gore merged to create the municipality of North Grenville. And to celebrate our quarter-century milestone, Council has been hosting monthly meetings. Over the summer, we were in Oxford Mills and Bishop's Mills. Tonight, of course, we're here in South Gore, and on September 19th, we'll be in Burritts. And all of this leads to a culminating celebration on September 26th, which is a Tuesday, at the Municipal Center. So just very quickly before I begin, obviously a big day for many parents and families in the community, back to school. There are many initiatives that were sort of on pause during the pandemic to get kids walking and biking safely to school. So there is a map which shows parents and families where their kids can do so safely because routes have been approved by the health unit. Our public works team has been out examining any hazards and have endeavored to fix those. And my other note for this evening is there is a heat warning, if you haven't noticed, council colleagues. And of course, the municipal lobby, as well as the arenas, are open late into the evening. So anyone is welcome to drop by the municipal center to cool down. So with that, I should also congratulate the Surge baseball team. The U15 provincial championships were here on the weekend, and our Kemptville, or I should say our Surge team, which includes some Kemptville and North Grenville kids, came in third. So they placed third in the provincial championships. So amazing, really quite the effort. So congratulations to our local Surge team. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I will invite one of my colleagues to read the land acknowledgements. Any takers, colleagues? Okay, Councillor Wilson.
The municipality of North Grenville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Grenville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much. So I'll look for the approval of the agenda. Colleagues, we have been advised that two of our delegations aren't here this evening. So we were going to hear from Lorraine Reckman and Patty McDonald, and they are not here this evening, and we have opted to invite them to a meeting in the next 10 days so that they can come before Truth and Reconciliation Day and present their advice and recommendations in regards to the Indigenous Advisory Circle. So we really look forward to that. So I'm going to look to amend the agenda so that we do not this evening deal with reports I.2 under corporate services, the Indigenous Advisory Circle Terms of Reference update. So with that amendment, I'll look for a mover and a seconder to adopt tonight's agenda. Councillor Sullivan, Deputy Mayor Barclay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? And before we go to Mr. Shanahan, I see that Mr. Patterson is here, and I know he's here to talk about Terry Fox Day. So perhaps we'll invite Mr. Patterson to come forward first and tell us all about the Terry Fox Run, and we'll get that one out of the way. And we want to thank, you can come to the table. It's really the only way to do this. And of course, we thought it was so fitting that Mr. Patterson got to come and present at South Gower Park. This is a very cherished recreational facility within North Grenville, and I know there are lots of kids and families that look forward to participating in the efforts to acknowledge and raise money for cancer through the Terry Fox Walk Run. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Okay. Mayor Peckford and members of council, thank you for allowing me the time to speak to you tonight. My name is Steve Patterson. I'm representing the Kemptville Terry Fox Run Committee this year. As you may know, September 1st will mark 43 years since Terry Fox ran his last Marathon of Hope Mile. Although cancer forced him to stop his marathon, he never gave up the hope. Terry promised to return to the road if his health would allow it. He may not have been able to run, but for 43 years, Canadians and other countries all over the world have continued on in his name with hopes to someday find a cure for cancer. Terry persevered, and likewise, on a smaller scale, so has the community of North Grenville. The Terry Fox Run has been a staple in the North Grenville community for over 36 years. Despite the hard times that we have all faced recently, North Grenville has raised almost $50,000 over the last 3 years alone, bringing our cumulative total to just under $350,000. We are excited to host an in-person event again this year to celebrate both Terry and our community's passion for finding a cancer's cure. The event is taking place at the Ferguson Forestry Center on Sunday, September 17th. The run will begin at 10 a.m. Participants can choose to walk, run, or bike a 2, 5, or 10K route. Those looking to sign up for the run can do so by visiting terryfox.org and registering under the site of Kemptville, and/or anyone looking to make a donation can do so online. T-shirts and other merchandise are available at shop.terryfox.org. T-shirts will also be available at the registration table, which opens at 9 a.m. on the day of the event. We, the Kemptville Terry Fox Committee, asked the council to declare Sunday, September 17th, 2023, Terry Fox Day in North Grenville, and raise the flag on the week leading up to the event to show that the spirit of this event and his name is still alive and well in North Grenville. We kindly ask that you, as members of council, consider promoting this event through your individual social media platforms, and also hope to see some of you at the event itself, running, walking, biking, and cheering us on this incredible community. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it. Okay, colleagues, any questions for Mr. Patterson? I know, Mr. Patterson, you organized the Oxford on Rideau Terry Fox Run throughout the community as well. Is that right?
No, just a staff member. Another staff member does it. I'm just a participant for that
You're
one.
okay,
Yeah.
and a champion. You're definitely a champion of the run. Okay, and I think all the schools in North Grenville tend to organize something to mark the day. Is that right?
Yeah. So the school run this year is September 22nd. So the school runs always have a different date.
Okay.
But so yeah, the community run is the 17th, and then each school will do their own on September 22nd,
Gotcha.
Friday.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
And if people want to donate but not necessarily participate in the run or the walk itself, they can certainly do that on the website. Is that right?
So they can go right on, and then instead of register for the event, there's a donate option as well. So they can do that right online.
Perfect. And 2, 5, and 10. Did I hear? Or 1,
Yes.
2, and 5.
A 2, a 5, and,
Okay.
and a 10.
Right.
Yeah.
And what distance will you be running this year? Have you figured it out?
I just run the event. I do a 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's very impressive.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we have the presentation from Mr. Patterson. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Wilson, do you have a question, Councillor Wilson? You're good? Okay. So I will call the question on declaring, I think we're going to declare what's the date again? Sunday, September 17th. Terry Fox Run one walk in the municipality of North Grenville. So I look for a mover and a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Deputy Mayor Barkley, and I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Good luck. All right. Next on our list is Mr. Shanahan, and we asked David to come as a historian in the community, who's very well recognized and has spent a lot of time over many years documenting the evolution of North Grenville and its parts. So we thank you, Mr. Shanahan, for being here to refresh all of our memories on the South Gower community, which was a integral and very vital part of what is North Grenville today, but certainly its own township prior to amalgamation.
Thank you, Mayor. Nice to see all the council and staff. When South Gower was amalgamated into what became the municipality of North Grenville, it had been in existence for almost exactly 200 years. And it was in 1798 that the lines of the township were actually laid out into nice, neat rectangles for people to come and settle. And of course, for untold generations before that, it was the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, particularly the Algonquin of the Ottawa Valley. In fact, even up into the 20th century, the Ottawa River was known for many people as the Great River of the Algonquin. I think what I'd just like to give is one of those, those boring historical facts. Although South Gower was actually surveyed almost 10 years after Oxford and Rideau, it was settled earlier because it was accessible. So there were people living in South Gower long before there was anybody living in Oxford and Rideau. And in fact, you could say that Oxford and Rideau was colonized by South Gower. In 1819, a man called John Bice from South Gower bought land in what was Oxford and Rideau. He sold half of the land to a man called Asa Clothier. Clothier arrived, set up a mill that became the institution around which Kemptville developed. The south half of that same lot was sold to a man called Thomas McCarger, an Irishman also settled here in South Gower. He actually sold that land back to Asa Clothier and bought some other land on which he built his farm, his homestead. That same building, the original building for Thomas McCarger, was later added to, an added floor put on, and it became what is today Leahurst on the Kemptville campus. That was actually Thomas McCarger's home. So there was a great deal of movement from South Gower into Oxford and Rideau. The same Asa Clothier, who basically founded Kemptville, a few years later went up the South Branch. That's the river that runs through Oxford and Rideau. He went up the South Branch and he founded Oxford Mills. So clearly South Gower had a big influence on colonizing, as I said, Oxford and Rideau. South Gower itself, it's one of those places that nobody understands the name because it's spelled like it should be Gower, but it's pronounced Gore. And there's always been this controversy. Was it named Gore because of the shape? Because it's an irregular shape. It's a gore. But then why is it spelled G-O-W-E-R? And the other idea was it's named after this famous Lord of the Admiralty who died in 1792. Personally, I think the people who named the township were very clever and basically used both. So they called it Gore after Gore, and they called it Gore because it was a gore. They just kept the other name. Most of the townships around here were named after people and places. So you had Oxford and you had Cambridge. But you also had Mountain and Dundas named after people. So it's quite likely it was Gower or Gore. or Gower. Anyway, here it is with a strange name that isn't pronounced right. There's a lot that could be said about the history. This place, South Gower, was very active. Pelton's Corners and Hexton were very concentrated settlements. Each of them had at least 2 churches. They had schools. They had a number of stores. They had taverns. And of course, there was the hotel in Hexton, which is now the general store, having had a major fire and losing its top floor. And it's very difficult now. I think in some ways, amalgamation has made South Gower the poor relation in North Grenville. It has probably lost more of infrastructure and identity than Oxford and Rideau or Kempville did. But I think what's really important, and this is why I thought rather than talk, I have been known to talk, but rather than do that, I'd like to talk through something. There's a film that was made in 1953. So about 70 years ago, the National Film Board came here and made a movie about, a documentary about life on a farm in South Gower through a whole year. And what you see on the screen now was typical of a community, a rural community at the time. These are all the neighbors coming together to help with the harvest. And at the end of the day, they'd come back to the homestead, and this was the feast that they would have, provided by the family, the Sloan family it was in this case. And this was classic. This was the community coming together to help bring in the harvest and then to celebrate the harvest together over a meal. And this was going on for generations, you could say for the 200 years. You still have things like this with church groups holding harvest festivals and harvest dinners and so on. But this was a time when the community was very closely knit. It was one of those times when South Gower had a real identity, and people knew where they were from in that regard. And you can see in this the old farming traditions. 1953, for some people, isn't that long ago. The film was released in 1955. I was born that year. So it's not that long ago. But you can see the changes, the difference that the time has made to the way in which everything happens. And our communities and our social structures have adapted and changed in the same way. As part of the whole, actually looking at this, you kind of wondered about the whole health and safety aspect of farming at the time, especially the cats wandering around in the grain. I'm sure that was fine. The interesting thing, this film is about a man who came from the Netherlands to live on a farm here for a year, while he looked around to find a farm where he could settle and bring his family over from the Netherlands. And this was very, very common. You could pause it here for a second, if you could. This was common in the 1950s. You find the Christian Reformed Church in Kempville was founded by that generation of immigrants from the Netherlands. So that tradition, that legacy is still there. So, okay, sorry, you can go ahead with that. This film, I think, shows something that you don't see too often. This is the woman of the house, the farm wife. I don't know where I've heard that word. The farm wife preparing things for the winter, and the mason jars and the cans. And what was important, and it comes out in the film, is that the community was very self-contained. The farms were self-contained. They grew their own food, they prepared their food, they stored their food. And this was being put aside for the winter. Now we go to the supermarket, we go to the shops on a daily basis, a weekly basis. But this was a serious part of the year for the people in South Gower. This is something that was part of the round. And that's one thing, again, that you find. After the Harvest Festival service in the local church, everybody went down to the basement for a community meal. Another community celebration of the harvest. Again, you notice a slight change from modern day in that all the men are sitting down and all the women are serving or in the kitchen. There are some women sitting down, to be fair. They're usually elderly. Now, the thing is, these are not actors. What you're looking at are the real people of South Gore 70 years ago, going around the normal life in this community. After the meal, they went back to the community hall, which is basically the hotel, and they had a dance. Obviously, they weren't going to do this in the church. Those who didn't want to dance went upstairs and played cards. In some cases, it's euchre. They actually say at one point that the man of the house liked to play poker. That's him getting up now, looking very well-dressed and very stiff. This is not an actor. This is a man who knows he's on camera and is not used to wearing those clothes or acting in front of the thing. 70 years ago, these are the people of South Gore. These are the young people and the older people together having these celebrations. This is a community that doesn't exist in the same way anymore. So when we're talking about 25 years later, after amalgamation, this is what we want to look at. The second piece is, oh, by the way, I'm sure somebody will tell me when I've gone over my time. The second piece of video shows Hexton at the time, and there's some interesting kind of views there that are familiar and not. This is the boy crossing over. That's the top of Slater Road. There were 3 stores there at the time, a gas station, a church, a school, and that's the school that he's going into. This is Billy Sloan, going to school, the one-room schoolhouse. All the kids, all in the same class. This is the guy from Holland who's going across to the general store. This is Gilmer's, and you see a nice big stone structure. That is now the general store in Hexton. That's what it was. And if that's not classic Ontario, what is? Rural Ontario, all the guys sitting around the stove, chatting away, smoking. And this is at night, so I don't know what exactly was happening. You'll also see in the background there's 2, what can only be called teenagers. They're young girls sipping their sodas and watching this guy as he goes by. Everywhere I noticed throughout this film, there's ad for Salada tea, which I can actually remember when I first came to Canada, but I haven't seen for a long time. This is the local store, the post office. There's our teenage girls hanging out and watching the guy. And outside, the boys with the bikes. This thing of hanging out outside the library or hanging outside the store or hanging out at night in town is not new. And no matter what the generation of today say, that was them. That was them then. Now this isn't necessarily to do with South Gore, but it is. I mentioned that Kemptville was a colony of South Gore. These are the Sloans going to visit the colony. This is Prescott Street, 1953. Every week, this family, like many families in South Gore, would go into Kemptville for their shopping. There's Anderson's store, the old post office. This is the agricultural representative. He was there, an Ontario government official who was there to advise farmers. You can see Prescott Street. It's very recognizable, but very different. There's a lot of cars and it's very busy. Perhaps we should ask them how they did that. You go around the corner there and you'll see that same door, that same place. Now they're outside what's now Mr. Mozzarella's. This was Sammy Lecker's store, and that's Sammy himself there. In the background, that building is now where the library is. This was inside Anderson's store, the nearest thing to a supermarket. What you're seeing there, right there, is what is now the History Hub. That's the same room. And there's an interesting difference in the culture of the day, as you'll see in a minute. She'll go and she'll buy her groceries for the week, and she'll meet the neighbors, and the boy will be playing with the guns. Notice there's no locks on these guns. They just take them down and they look at them. Prescott Street. And the bridge. There's a bridge. Somebody likes bridges. After that, they went to the movies. The movie theater is where the post office is now. Later on became Raina's store. And that used to be Butler's Victorian Pantry. This was part of the life of South Gore. Kempville grew up and became important in a way that Hexton and Pelton's Corners never did, because Kempville had the canal, and then Kempville had the railway, and then Kempville had Highway 16. And as a result, it kind of sucked the economic life out of South Gore. And that's partly why amalgamation, when it came about, it was difficult, it was traumatic. But they knew that they had to give up something. There was an inevitability to the decline of the community. There was too much competition. The way society was changing. So just to sum up, I would say, this is not just historical facts and cold and academic. What you saw there were people, real people, living a real life in a real community that existed here, in this place called South Gore, and had been going for 200 years until they became part of the municipality of North Grenville. Thank you. Any questions at all? I don't know.
Well, thank you very much. And obviously that video, that documentary really brings it to life for those of us who didn't grow up here and didn't have the same insight or history. I would only ask, do you know why South Gore would have been on the radar screen? Is it the National Film Board that made that documentary, or was it another?
Yeah, it was the National Film Board.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure why they chose it, why they chose Hexton. Other than the fact that South Gore was still very active traditional agricultural rural community. It's obviously close to Ottawa, so it's very handy from that point of view. And the fact that they chose to use real people and followed a real person through the year, whether they meant it or not, they created this amazing record for us. The film as a whole, it lasts about 45 to 50 minutes. And it has a great deal about the farm life. That's what it's called, the farm calendar. So it's a tremendous social history document on what it was like to be on a farm, to live and to work a farm in this community back then. One day, what the Historical Society would like to do is have a sort of a public showing of the whole film, because we know there are still people here who could identify some people there. And I think that would be really well worth doing. Give them back an identity.
I was going to ask, and Councillor Wilson, do you know some of the families that were featured in the film? Or know of their, obviously?
I've had a chance to see this film and to listen to the names, and like if you hear it, you will be able to identify names and people there. Actually, one of the people in there was Don Thompson. He was a counselor in Oxford on Rideau. But it was, I would really like someone to sit down and look at them and see who they all are. There's still some of these folks around that can identify them, and yeah, I'd love to be at the table when they do it. Thank you for it, David.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, council colleagues?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Shanahan, for that historical presentation. Very interesting. I kept thinking I was going to see my grandparents or my mom in that film, and so I certainly want to see the whole thing, because my parents and I have aunts and uncles that were living here at the time. In fact, my last remaining aunt just passed away last month here in Kempville, so I'd really like to see the whole film too, because very interesting.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Shanahan. We appreciate it. So colleagues, we in fact are able to welcome this evening as part of our delegations. Lorraine Reckmans is here, I believe. I saw Lorraine walk in. So we'd love to invite you so that you can tell us a little bit more about the proposed amendments to the terms of reference. Does that make sense? Would you like to do that now? Well, certainly you don't have to speak. Yep. Okay. Yes, and we certainly welcome Mr. Seymour. We wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to the proposed changes around the terms of reference. So you're more than welcome to do that if you wish. It's no problem.
Okay, so I'll just
Sure.
dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I won't take long. So there's two things that I would speak to in the terms of reference. One was just making an amendment to be more inclusive of the citizens of North Grenville. So Indigenous people want to build relationships with our neighbors. So that it was, what we found was the terms of reference were too focused on the municipality's relationship with Indigenous people, but we wanted to broaden it into a community effort. So the second thing is really, to me, I think is a very powerful statement that I have called on the municipality to make. As Indigenous people, we rely on allies in order to move our political agenda along. And we have a political agenda, and basically it is about reconciliation. It's about reconciling Indigenous sovereignty with occupied lands and settlements. So I just come from another meeting earlier this evening where I said in 1996, Canada held the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, and there were hundreds of recommendations that were made in 1996 that were never incorporated. And so like the Royal Commission, we have now the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. And the calls to action, I hope, will never slip by the way that RCAP did. In fact, I'm embarking on an initiative to revive RCAP everywhere I can. So what I have asked is, I've asked the municipality of North Grenville to issue, excuse me, a public statement declaring that the municipality of North Grenville is an ally to Indigenous people, and that we will engage in a relationship where we are an advisory circle to council, and council makes a commitment to respect us, understanding that we are sovereign nations with underlying legal title and interest in these lands. So I did think about it as an Indigenous woman who's been engaged in activism for decades. I've come to the realization that my time is precious. And I really want to play and work with serious partners who are interested in moving reconciliation along. And that means demonstrating political will and allyship for Indigenous people. So that's the reason I made the request. And I come to this understanding with myself that if the municipality of North Grenville is not prepared to make this weighty political statement, that I would not engage in the advisory circle, because my agenda is really to advance the interests of Indigenous people politically in Canada. So, miigwech.
Thank you. Mr. Seymour, would you like to add anything?
I'm just new to this game in the Indigenous world because I didn't grow up in a reserve or went to things. So I'm helping out and learning as I go along, and I'm following her lead.
Thank you.
If I could maybe ask you to read the statement for everyone's benefit. Thank you.
Yes, and that is that the recommendation is that council commit to receiving advice and recommendations from the Indigenous Advisory Circle with respect and agree to declare its allyship with Indigenous peoples. This relationship will be founded on an understanding of the sovereignty of the original Algonquin peoples and their legal interests in their lands, as well as other original peoples of Turtle Island that make this area home. So that language has come directly from the Indigenous Advisory Circle, correct? Okay, excellent. So with that, I think colleagues, well, initially we had thought we would defer consideration of this matter until next week because we have Ms. Reckmans and Mr. Seymour with us now. Certainly we can deliberate over it now. This is something that I understand you would like embedded in this relationship and this understanding of the work that you're doing on behalf of the Indigenous Advisory Circle with us. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so we would like the commitment to the statement, but we'd also like the statement to be public to the community. So if it could be read at the September 26th celebration and again on September 30th.
So we're putting it back on the agenda?
Yeah.
Oh, great. We'll get there real soon. You want to skip ahead?
Well, because, yes, because we are now in the throes of this conversation, I would suggest that we just go to that section of our report. I think it's I-2, if I'm not mistaken. And we can consider that statement in the context of, I think, the revised terms of reference. So that is I-2. And Ms. Janot, were you planning to also speak to the work of the committee?
Thanks, Lorraine and Phil, and thanks for having me as part of your committee to provide admin support. No, it's okay. I'm just going to be quick. I think Lorraine and Phil summed it up quickly and very easily. We just do have a second recommendation there to approve and enact bylaw 8023 to amend bylaw 2023, a bylaw to establish the committees of council and adopt the terms of reference to replace Schedule B11. So it would just be the two recommendations. Thank you.
Okay,
And
understood.
so, yeah, and if I could add, so we discussed the terms of reference, and often as Indigenous people, we find ourselves working in colonial systems that don't necessarily fit our culture. So we did make some modifications to the terms of reference to try to be more culturally appropriate for Indigenous people.
Yes, and we were hoping that you would do that so that you could sort of fit, to your point, adapt the model, if you will, of a standard advisory committee and make sure it was more inclusive and conducive to the dialogue that you were hoping to have amongst the group. And hopefully with that good, productive discussion, you could bring really important recommendations to us. So I appreciate the work because I know we're in the early days of the Indigenous Advisory Circle. So it's many months and years ahead, hopefully, of really important relationship building and insight and advice that you can provide to us as council and certainly future councils. So with that in mind, council colleagues, I think we have the rationale that's been provided by Ms. Reckmans for some of the statements that are part of the terms of reference or the proposed revised terms of reference. So I'll just look to council colleagues for any questions, and I see Deputy Mayor Barclay. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a question. I was hoping you were looking for a mover and a seconder so we can talk about it.
Certainly, I just wanted to make sure that before we get there, are there any questions of our guests this evening in terms of the presentation they've provided?
Sure. Since I misunderstood, thank you for presenting that to us. I've read the amended bylaws. So and these make perfect sense to me. I'm just curious, what kind of resistance did you anticipate?
I guess I'm looking for courage, and if you demonstrate courage, I'll be happily surprised. No, I do. I mean, it is we're living in a politically charged world, and I think there are politicians that make these statements, and I think it's important that they're meaningful, that Canadians understand that we, as Indigenous people, are against the wall in these days, and your allyship would be incredibly meaningful, and it would demonstrate leadership to other communities, because Indigenous people need partners. This is a Canadian political system. It's not an Indigenous political system. So if ever it's going to change, that's on you. So miigwech.
So I guess what I was trying to tease out was I think I've been privileged, and I speak for the rest of the council, that we've started that journey towards truth and reconciliation. It's been a wonderful journey so far. And I don't see anything in this bylaw that would, you know, a request for allyship, that makes perfect sense. And, you know, that the relationship is founded on an understanding. I mean, in terms of what the municipality can do in terms of further your political aims down the road, I think that's what we're left with, is allyship and support and providing some courage and mutual respect, you know. So
So it's a big statement to say you recognize underlying Indigenous title. It's a big statement.
If I was a member of provincial parliament or federal parliament, yes, it would be. But and not to diminish your request, but I think, you know, for a municipality, that should be an easy thing to do.
So we'll start here, and then we'll move on to the province.
It's certainly, what's your assessment, Lorraine, of the status of those negotiations, right, of recognition of Indigenous lands, occupied Indigenous lands, if you will, and the Crown, right? Because obviously that's where a lot of this is now being negotiated, and or not, sort of depending on the day or the week or who's in power. So could you shed a little light on where you think things stand in terms of the status of that Crown Indigenous peoples relationship?
Yeah, so one of the difficult pieces in the negotiations is identifying who will be negotiating. So this goes back to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. In 1996, the Commission made a recommendation that Canada invest in nation rebuilding. So because we're organized under the Indian Act, there is a challenge to Indian Act chiefs that they have no claims to sovereignty because they're agents of the Crown. And right now there's a movement outside of the Indian Act of Indigenous citizens to organize and rebuild the nations, as RCAP called. But the challenge is that there has to be an investment into research and organizing so that communities can self-define. And on that note, I should just add that I just did petition the King calling for a new royal proclamation so that Canada will reconfirm its commitment to the original nations. So it's a long journey to basically reorganize the original nations. And at this point, there is no one really to negotiate with, because the Indian Act creates the Indian Act Band Council system, and the Band Council system basically administers the Indian Act on reserve lands. So the chief and councils essentially are co-opted through colonial policy, and Indigenous people outside of that system are trying to organize.
I think that's such crucial context, right, for the struggle right now. And I know it's, you know, sometimes decades or centuries in the making to try to reclaim some of those lands that were lost or taken or stolen. But that being said, I guess despite the struggle with the Crown, I also recognize that there is validity and value in the municipality doing its part and making some statements that clearly are bold, but aren't sort of inaccurate when you talk about an understanding between ourselves and Indigenous peoples living here for the purposes of advancing truth and reconciliation. So I'll just look to other colleagues for questions. Okay, so if there are no other questions for the delegation, then I will look for a mover and a seconder. And I apologize, I'm going through various pieces of paper. So I think the motion that has been prepared is that, thank you, I'm going to borrow Deputy Mayor's, that Council approve and enact bylaw 8023 to amend bylaw 2323 to establish the committees of council and adopt the terms of reference, and that council, as I've just recently read, commit to receiving advice and recommendations from the advisory circle with respect, and agree to declare its allyship with Indigenous peoples. This relationship will be founded on an understanding of the sovereignty of the original Algonquin peoples and their legal interests and their lands, as well as the other original peoples of Turtle Island that make this area home. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder in regards to Councilor Strachian. Great. Deputy Mayor Barkley, thank you. Lorraine, as I was reading this, the only thing that came to mind is I know in this area, certainly the Algonquin peoples are definitely recognized as some of the original inhabitants. Are there other Indigenous peoples that sort of lay similar claim to lands in this area? I know it's come up from time to time.
A lot of people lay claim to lands in these areas.
Indeed.
I'll just leave it there, and my understanding is that this is Anishinaabe territory.
Right. So when we recognize the Haudenosaunee, for example, as we have in sort of, yeah. Do you have any comment on other Indigenous peoples who sort of have, who we've recognized sort of through our land acknowledgement?
So we did ask, I think in the advisory circle, we recommended that all events that are hosted by the community be Algonquin-led.
Okay.
So land acknowledges the historic relationship, right? There's a distinction.
We will say that.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I'm just pointing to our land acknowledgement, which in which North Grenville acknowledges that we operate on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. But at the same time, we recognize and honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat. So it's obviously the primary claim to this land is the Anishinaabe, without ignoring the historic relationship of those other two peoples.
So I'm not familiar with the Huron-Wendat's relationship to this territory, and I'm also not familiar with the Haudenosaunee's relationship.
Okay.
So if you could maybe provide me more information. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess in the context of what we're being asked to consider tonight, it's not necessarily to the exclusion of perhaps other original peoples who might come forward at some point. You're obviously looking for a specific acknowledgement of the Algonquin peoples in particular in regards to the relationship to these lands.
Yeah, so I think what I would say is that if you looked at the land claim and the map of the area of the land claim that the Algonquins had prepared, the Algonquins of Ontario had prepared in their case, very clearly they identified this as Algonquin territory. And I would assume that it's based on historical research and it's been verified.
Okay, motion's been moved and seconded. Any other questions? Not seeing any, I will call the vote. All in favor? Good. Okay, well, thank you for being here.
All coming off you.
Okay, so we're through our delegations, colleagues, and yep. So I understand that we're next moving on to Rail Safety Week 2023. And that is to be held across Canada from September 18th to 24. And we have the statement before us. Ms. Janot, do you think it's important to read that statement? I'm not sure Ms. Janot is here, so she isn't. So it is an initiative across Canada to diminish the risk of obviously traversing rail crossings where there could be a significant danger or obviously fatalities. And so what we know is 232 railway crossings and trespassing incidents have occurred in Canada in 2022, resulting in 66 avoidable fatalities and 43 avoidable serious injuries. Whereas educating and informing the public about rail safety will reduce the number of avoidable fatalities and injuries, and whereas Operation Lifesaver is a public-private partnership whose aim is to work with the public, the rail industry, governments, police services, media, and others to raise rail safety awareness. And whereas CN has requested our municipal council adopt this resolution in support of its ongoing efforts to raise awareness, save lives, and prevent injuries in communities, including in the municipality of North Grenville. So obviously we have a number of rail crossings in North Grenville, and in fact there was a very close call earlier this year with a near miss on one of our rail crossings. So this is certainly relevant to our community. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder then to move to advance this declaration. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan, Deputy Mayor Barkley. Any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good, that carries. Next, we'll move on to Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Of course, last Friday we raised the flag, and we know that there's a local family and community group called G's Gang, and they're giving the boot to cancer this month, to childhood cancer in particular. So the boot is doing the rounds in North Grenville, so we do hope that you'll receive the boot just for a day and support the critical fundraising that occurs every September to ensure appropriate and timely research innovations and to support CHIO, which is our local children's hospital. So with that in mind, I'll look for a mover and a seconder to proclaim the month of September Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and direct the cancer flag to be raised, which we have raised from September 1 to 30th. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Strachian. Any comments or questions on this motion? I'm not seeing any. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. So we have a number of items under the consent agenda. They're listed there, colleagues. It includes a municipal appointment update, and I don't know if I'll have the opportunity to formally welcome our newly minted clerk, Chloe Preston, who started today. So welcome, Chloe. We're excited to have you. We know that you're not that far from home in coming to work at the municipality of North Grenville, and you have some strong relationships in our community. So we're excited to have you. So welcome. So that's just one item under the consent agenda, colleagues. I think you see the others. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder for our consent agenda. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. I just would like to point out that on the council meeting minutes of July 25th, Councillor Wilson is not included as being present, but she was at that meeting and actively involved because she did a lot of moving and seconding. So that's the only correction that I see. Otherwise, I would move the consent agenda as with that amendment.
So just a small adjustment to the minutes? Okay, good. Okay, so with that, I will look for a mover and a seconder for our consent agenda. Councillor Sullivan, thank you. A seconder, please. Deputy Mayor, thank you. And I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good, that carries. So we've dealt with our corporate services items this evening. I don't believe our CAO, Ms. Karen Dunlop, has anything this evening. So I think we're going to go straight to Parks and Rec, and we'd like to welcome Mr. Guy. And this is in regards to the waiving of fees policy that council asked for a number of months ago. Welcome, Mr. Guy. It's very appropriate that you're here in one of our Parks and Rec facilities. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Peckford, and good evening to all council members. So tonight I'm bringing a report forward, waiving of fees policy for municipal-owned recreation facilities. So those recreation facilities could be our ice arenas, our hall suites, the municipal center, some of our outlying facilities such as the Armory, Maplewood Hall, our sports fields, as you see here in South Gower Park, and the Urbandale Arts Center. Those would be some of the, or most of our recreation facilities that could be part of this policy. So the municipality receives verbal and written requests from individuals and organizations to consider waiving of recreation facility fees. Council had requested the Director of Parks, Recreation, Culture to prepare a draft waiving of fees policy for consideration. The policy will assist in reducing financial barriers and ultimately benefit the community. Will support community fundraising efforts, provide a process for equitable evaluation of requests for waiving of fees, and provide a recommendation to be given to approve the waiving of fees for municipally owned recreation facilities. I think I might have missed one of the slides. I'll go back to it. Yes, I did. So in 2022, fundraising event revenues at the municipal center accounted for about 15% of the total revenue. Facility rental revenue in 2023 should exceed 2022 revenue at the North Grenville Municipal Center, and it will certainly do that. It appears that our ICE revenue, as well as our hall and theater revenue, is starting to get back to pre-COVID numbers. I received an update from staff today. Whether that 15% will rise in terms of fundraising events or individuals or organizations asking for waiving of fees will be a wait and see on that. Request for reduced rental rates at other community facilities and sports field is very limited. So we get very little requests for sports fields. Our sports field rates are not, extremely high in terms of what we charge. And we don't see a whole lot of requests for ICE, waiving of ICE fees. It's mostly to do with our halls and our theater. I believe that is the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. What I don't see in here is the policy itself, or the criteria, I guess is more the word. There's the draft. I see it now.
Yeah.
Can you speak to what informed the criteria that's presented here in terms of how we would treat differently sized groups for consideration around rental space? It's certainly the case that many, many community organizations have reached out, especially when, of course, they are fundraising locally, and all proceeds from an event are intended to support a local charity or not-for-profit. So can you just help us understand how the policy would be applied?
Yes, I can do that, Mayor Peckford. I think part of what went into the draft policy is within the request is to have significant social or community benefits to the residents of North Grenville. Does the dollar value of the fees related to the rental is outweighed by the social community benefits? So those are the two biggest, I think, nuances as part of the policy that we would look at. As an example, Heyday as an example, certainly is a large fundraising event. Proceeds go to the Kemptville District Hospital. So that would be an example of a large rental, but the proceeds are certainly a benefit to the community. I think, when we're looking at requests in those manners, in that manner, those are the type of requests I think that would be, that would fall into this policy, so to speak.
Okay, I'll recognize Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Sullivan. Okay, just Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you to you, Mr. Guy, through her worship. The $10,000 figure, have we been tracking the number of requests annually for waiving of fees? How did we arrive at that $10,000 maximum?
I did bring the the draft policy to the senior management team to discuss. In 2022, I think we had fundraising revenue in the manner of about $7,400. Now, we did not waive fees in the amount of $7,400, but we thought we would start at a $10,000 limit, and it's something that we would sort of evaluate as we go through this policy to see if that number is sufficient, if it's too high, is it too low based on the annual request that we may receive. The $2,000 per event was based on, I guess, a couple of larger events that we do have, such as Heyday, such as the Sweetheart Brunch that's held put on by the Knights of Columbus.
Okay. Councillor Strachan, please.
To Mr. Guy, through you, Madam Mayor. So I think one part of this is it's been driven by the requests that have come over the years, but also we saw this year during the community grants process that there were several requests to have fees waived for the rental spaces. So I think that there's definitely a want and a need for that in the community. Out of the approximately 7,400, do you have any idea how many of those, what percentage or dollar value would have been waived if this policy had been in place? Because I would assume that not all of the $7,400 would be waived, because that wouldn't necessarily apply to charitable or not-for-profit organizations. Do you have that information at this stage?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Strachan. I don't have that particular information. I'd have to go back and speak with our events coordinator, and just in terms of who those organizations or individuals were that accounted for that $7,400, to see whether they would, if they requested the waiver fees, would they suit the policy that's in place, and make a recommendation from there.
So I appreciate the thought that's gone into this. My only concern is around compliance. It says, must provide evidence that regular rental fees constitute a real barrier to the running of the event or program. My understanding is not necessarily that certain organizations feel that renting a municipal facility is a barrier per se, but they don't want to forfeit the very valuable dollars that are generated out of that event, particularly when they go to support things, to your point, like Heydays major event is supporting the very urgent acquisition of a CT scanner machine. So I feel that this language is not necessarily reflective of the intent of the policy. The other, I think, criteria here is certainly very helpful, but I would actually suggest that we remove the wording that under compliance, certain community groups must meet all of the following conditions, because I don't think it's necessarily hardship at play. It's more about the fact that if people are spending inordinate amounts of volunteer time to generate funds that stay 100% in the community, they really just want to use every dollar that's raised to that end, and the municipality is a partner in some of those events. So if we could replace the word all with some, I think that will give you the latitude you need to not use hardship as a core criteria. That makes sense.
Thank you for the comments, Mayor Peckford, and certainly it's a draft policy, so we can make any changes that council wishes to see.
Great. The only other thing I would note, and I know we had a little bit of feedback on this today, is if this policy is such that a delay getting a request to council means a lack of certainty for a particular organization, certainly I think we would be open to delegating that authority to the CAO or to yourself. I certainly think the benefit of having groups come to council is we get to also understand the value and the impact of waiving those fees, and we can also become champions for the event. So at this stage, I think as long as there aren't long delays in the getting a request to council, I'm comfortable with how the policy is written now, but there may be a time where, quite frankly, the delegation of that authority would be appropriate, and we don't necessarily need to be privy or involved in every decision. So those are my comments at the time.
Just to comment on that, certainly it was there was an email today from a community member who suggested that to save time there could be a delegation of authority. I think when the policy was drafted, just wanted I thought it was important that council was made aware of the requests that were coming in and the dollar values, and so that a recommendation could come forward and that council and staff are somewhat on the same page in terms of moving forward. But I absolutely agree. There might be some instances where somebody wants a $300 fee waived, and it may not be appropriate to bring it to council just to save time.
Indeed. All right, Councillor Strachan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Guy. I think another one of the points that has been made as we've gone through this is concerning the timing of requests. If they need to be ahead of the budget cycle, or they need to be at the same time as the community grants, or if we would have various intakes throughout the year, because should there be events that are thought of halfway through the year, but they didn't have a chance to come forward and ask for this request before the $10,000, for example, was used up. I know that there isn't any timing in this draft policy, and I recognize that it's a draft, but maybe if there's some way of capturing that aspect of it to allow it to be a little bit, I don't know, more equitably or more easily dispersed throughout the year as opposed to only at one intake, might be something to consider.
Okay, we could, thank you for the comment, Councillor Strachan. Yeah, it wasn't really something that was considered in terms of deadline for this type of thing. It would be sort of on an as case basis. The only time I think it would become an issue is if we've reached the $10,000 limit. So,
and I think that's
and at this time, you know, it's a wait and see whether those types of, you know, the amount of requests will get us that far.
If we found a way, and I don't have the right solution necessarily in mind, but if there was a way to have intakes throughout the year, because otherwise you sort of get a flood at the beginning of the year for better organized groups, bigger groups perhaps that can say, we know we have these events every year and $10,000 goes very quickly. And then, you know, there's no opportunity throughout the rest of the year for any other groups or maybe less organized or smaller groups to come forward. So just a consideration. Thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor Barkley?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Guy. This $10,000 limit would not be applied to any outstanding fees that remain unpaid. It wouldn't be used to forgive some outstanding balance of current groups.
That's correct.
Right.
All right.
I guess based on Councillor Strachan's comments, I would, if I could ask Council a question, do you see this policy being promoted to groups, or would it be somebody asking us if we could reduce their fees and then we could inform them, well, we actually have a policy?
I mean, I think at this stage, the policy is public. Certainly, I think awareness may vary between and among groups, but no doubt, I think over time, people may become more informed that the policy exists. I think maybe perhaps you can closely monitor the uptake. Certainly, I think there are two big events that now have precedent of having fees waived. So I think Councillor Strachan's concern is they happen in the first half of the year, so you don't want to forgive the rental revenue for those and leave yourself with no opportunity to potentially recognize the efforts of a smaller group. So I think we'd really ask that you sort of keep an eye on it and really pace how we, deploy the $10,000, if you will, so that we can sort of be fair and conscious of the scope and size of different groups that may come forward. Okay.
Sounds good.
Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, Madam, this is a question to the rest of council. So I think as it's written right now, these requests would come to council to approve. Mm-hmm. So it would be up to us to accept the rationale or not. Mm-hmm. So it's not delegated to
it is not.
Director Guy. Yes, okay.
Okay. Okay, so we've made one small adjustment to the policy in terms of the criteria. And apart from that, have we moved this policy yet? Do we have a mover and a seconder? Can I ask for a mover and a seconder? No. So Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Wilson, thank you. So the consideration of the new policies on the table, and we are looking at the recommendation to approve the waiving of fees for municipal-owned recreational facilities and spaces with an upset limit of $20,000 per request. Oh, it says 2,000.
Sorry, that's a typo.
I apologize. As I was reading it, it struck me as strange. With an upset limit of $2,000 per request and $10,000 as a maximum budget allotment, and the director of Parks, Rec and Culture to bring recommendations in the form of a report to council for waiving a fee request. So we've got a mover and seconder. We've had some good discussion. Any final thoughts? Councillor Strachan.
In addition to the consideration regarding the timing request, perhaps another way to also spread it out is to change the upset limit that would allow for multiple intakes so that you wouldn't have perhaps just 5 requests for $2,000. You could have, 10 of 1,000 or something like that. That may be another way to approach it. Sorry, I just thought of that. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll leave it to Mr. Guy to sort of give us a sense of how this goes. And, obviously it's of significant interest to council. So, we look forward to amending the policy as it's required so that there is a degree of fairness to it. I'm going to call the vote, colleagues. The night is getting late. All in favor? Good. All right. There you are. I'm okay. So I think really at this stage, we're not expecting a planning and development update of any significance or a public works update. Is that right, Ms. Dunlop? Okay, so we'll move on to correspondence. I do want to acknowledge that we are certainly receiving a petition on the scheduling of tar and chip of O'Neill Road. And to that end, there is a recommendation that council direct staff to report back on the matter. So I will look for a mover and a seconder to adopt that recommendation. Deputy Mayor Barkley, seconder, please. Okay, Councillor Wilson, thank you. And I'll call the question on that. All in favor? I think, colleagues, you will have noted the petition in your package. Moving on to other business, we have none. I'll look to colleagues. Any notices of motion this evening? Not seeing any. Introduction and consideration of bylaws. I think we've dealt with that. Is that right? Excellent. Any questions from members of the community? Any questions? Jennifer, you've done well here. Excellent. Thank you. So we'll go to close of the meeting. And this is the confirmation bylaw. That bylaw 8223 to confirm proceedings of council. That's regular meeting. I would say it's exceptional meeting held on September 5th, 2023 be adopted and passed. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Strachan, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. And a motion to adjourn at 8:18 p.m. And we will look for a mover. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan. We've done it, friends. We've made it through on a very hot night. Our only outdoor meeting, I think, really, since our time as a council. So I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Once again, thank you very much to staff for making this happen and to the Campbell District Community Association for their considerable support. It was a pleasure to be here this evening. Thanks.